Hi, my name is Warren North and welcome to Tennis Backwards. This is a tennis coaching video, but it's quite different to anything you'll have seen before, and that is because it takes a scientific approach to coaching tennis. So it uses things like Newtonian physics, Cartesian coordinates, fluid dynamics, and other scientific methods to analyze tennis. So if you think that sounds a bit boring, let's clear this up right at the start. It is, but surely the point is that tennis itself is not boring. So if you can use science to analyze tennis, develop tennis strokes and improve your game, then by definition that's not boring. Now, to another thing about this video is because it's more about the science of tennis, we don't need a whole lot of props. So I don't need an opponent. In fact, I don't actually even need a tennis court. So as you can see from the background here, I'm shooting this video in my kitchen at home in Auckland, New Zealand, in the middle of COVID lockdown. I've got the lockdown blues. So let's get started. So what are the three most important things in tennis? They're the ball, the racket, and the arm. So if you can get those three things right, you can hit a better shot. You can be doing all sorts of things. You can have your feet in the wrong place, be falling off the ball, have poor body language, but you just need to get those three things right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the ball, the racket, and the arm, and we're going to analyze them from a scientific point of view. That means we're going to define their properties and we're going to quantify those properties. And then that means that we can then look at each of them and we can take them as we want, bits of them, and we can put them together and we can build up tennis strokes. So let's get started. Okay, let's start with the ball. Here's a ball and you've just hit it and it's traveling through the air. What are its physical properties specific to the shot you've just hit? There are four. So the ball has speed and direction twice. And by that I mean it has translational and rotational energy or momentum. And here too, by the way, translation, it doesn't mean like lost in translation. It's a physics or scientific term for momentum or travel or motion. So the ball has translational speed and direction, and it has rotational speed and direction. So translational speed, that just means it's traveling there. It could travel slow or fast. Translational direction, it can travel up or down or sideways or whatever. And then spin speed, it can spin slow or fast. Now spin direction, now there's a bit of a trick here. Spin direction doesn't mean that it's topspin or slice. That's just a positive or negative speed. Spin direction refers to the direction of the axis of spin. So by that I mean I've got a ball here that I've put a pin through. Yeah, and I do apologize for the state of this ball, but it's one that I've rescued from my dog. But if the ball's spinning like that, which is really a pure topspin, you can see that's the axis of spin, so that is the direction of spin. And that direction of spin could rotate, and for instance it could be that would be pure side spin, or something like that, which would be a combination of side spin and top spin, or side spin and slice. So that's it. Those are the four and the only four physical properties of a ball that you have just hit. Okay, that's the ball. Now let's move on to the racket. What are the physical properties of the racket specific to the shot that you've just hit? So that last bit's important. So your racket might be heavy or light, or the strings tightly strung, or whatever. I mean, those properties, they apply to every shot. We want the properties that are specific to the shot you've just hit. Well, there's a whole lot of ways of looking at this, but remember we said that the ball had four properties? So, well, what we're going to do is we're going to identify four racket properties such that each one is specific to a ball property. And as you'll see later on, when we start working with individual shots, this gives us a powerful tool to sort of analyze and develop those strokes. So the first ball property is ball travel speed. So the racket property that corresponds with that is the speed of the racket traveling towards the ball, so either slow or fast. The next ball property is travel or translational direction, and the racket property that corresponds with that is the angle of the face of the racket. So for instance, like that, the ball goes up, and like that, the ball goes down. The next ball property is rotational speed, and the racket property that corresponds with that is the speed of the racket traveling at right angles to the direction of the ball, so either slow or fast, to give a slow or fast spin speed. And the final ball property is the direction of rotation, and remember, this is the direction of the axis of spin of rotation. Well, the racket property that corresponds with this is the direction that the racket is traveling as it imparts the spin. So by that, what I mean is, if I turn it around, so imagine I'm sort of heading the ball towards the camera, so this is a motion that gives me spin. In fact, that way gives me pure or 100% topspin, but I could also hit it that way, for instance. That would give me 100% side spin, or I could hit it that way, which would give me a combination of side spin and topspin. So those are the 4 racket properties. But just one thing just to develop this a little bit further. If you think of the 2 properties that give us the speed, so the translational speed and the spin speed, sometimes it's advantageous to look at it a slightly different way. And so, for instance, there's your travel speeds and there's your spin speed. So that's equivalent to a racket speed that way at an angle, which is like just straight of Pythagoras right angle triangle theory. But so those are a different way to look at those 2 properties. You can look at it either as just straight speeds or as a one speed at an angle. But that is your 4 racket properties. So that's the ball and the racket. Now let's move on to the arm. So the arm, it's all about the 3 joints. So there's the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. In theory, a joint can have up to 3 degrees of movement, one for each of the axes of space. So let's start by setting up those axes, Cartesian coordinates if you like, on a tennis court. So imagine I'm standing on a tennis court and I'm looking towards the camera, which is looking towards my opponent. So let's allocate that way, which is the baseline. Let's say that is the x-axis, y is up, and then z is the axis or the line towards my opponent. So what I mean then by a joint having up to 3 degrees of movement, I mean, if we look at that finger knuckle, so that is a joint rotating about the x-axis, that's one rotating about the y-axis, and that's one rotating about the z-axis. So let's move on to the arm. So if I hold my arm, I hold it towards the camera and I fix it. And so let's start with the wrist, and you'll see that I can rotate my wrist that way, which is about the x-axis. I can rotate it a little bit like that. It's about the y-axis, but not really much at all. I mean, that doesn't really even count. And that way, which is about the z-axis, it's completely fixed. I can't move it at all. And then moving up to the elbow, you can see I rotate it about my y-axis, or the y-axis, and I can rotate it about the z-axis. And note too, that's quite interesting really, and that is that the wrist works where the elbow doesn't, and vice versa. So for instance, the wrist rotates about the x-axis, but my elbow is completely locked that way, whereas I can rotate my elbow about the z-axis, but my wrist is completely locked. So now the shoulder has a full 3 degrees of movement. So I can rotate it about the x-axis, I can rotate it about the y-axis, and I can rotate it about the z-axis. So that's the arm. But just one thing we're going to do here, just to enhance things or just make things a little bit easier when we are looking at shots. I mean, I don't know about you, but in terms of the rotation, if I rotate like that, I can't really tell whether it's my elbow rotating or my shoulder. The two just sort of rotate seamlessly together. So what we're going to do is we'll combine those two rotation functions into one function or variable. So that's the arm. So in actual fact, we've got 5 total variables. So the 1 for the wrist, 1 for the elbow, 2 for the shoulder, and then a combined rotation function. So that's the arm. So that's the ball, the racket, and the arm. Now we've got to unlock the body, because up till now we've considered that the shoulder is in effect locked in space, which of course in a real tennis match that's not the way it is. Now the body, it's a little bit different from a joint, because a joint, if you remember, only had 3 degrees of movement, but a joint, my wrist can't travel with respect to my elbow, which can't travel with respect to my shoulder, but your body can. So your body can also move across the ground. So that means that a body, in theory, has got 2 degrees of movement for each axis in space. So that's 2 times 3, that gives you a grand total of 6 degrees of freedom. Now that's a lot, but fortunately we're really only interested in 2 of them, which is movement in the Z direction and rotation about the y-axis. So just to explain what I mean by that, it's quite simple really. So if I turn a bit like this, and so if I'm facing my opponent there, so if you remember, that's the Z direction. So movement along the Z axis, that's all it is. So basically what it means is I'm just stepping into the shot, or in fact in modern day tennis often you're stepping away from the shot. And then rotation about the y-axis, that's it there. If you remember, the y-axis is up, so that's it there. So that's it. To summarize where we are, the ball has 4 properties. The racket has 4 properties, each which correspond or aligns with a ball property. The arm's got 5 properties, and the body's got 2. That's all that can happen. So from that, we can take those and we can put them together and we can develop tennis strokes. But not only that, it gives us this added tool that we can, of each of those properties, we can identify, we can measure, and we can analyze individual shots by breaking them down into their individual components. And that's what we're going to do. But before we do that, we need to know more about the science of tennis, and that will feature in the next chapter of Tennis Backwards.